Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick and it's lovely to have you join me. Do you know about your family's history? Do you reach out to extended families to hear their stories of their past? As we get older, I think we like to feel that sense of connection, that legacy that we might be leaving to our children and the ones that our families that have gone before us have left to us. My guest today is Jill Phillips, a family storyteller with a passion to inspire families to connect through the telling of their past. She started life in Lamlash Street in London, emigrated to Canada where she obtained her master's degree and spent 30 years working as an occupational therapist and hospital manager. Motivated by her family's experience in 1960's London, Jill shares their stories to celebrate a time of close family connections in difficult life situations and a way of life which is fondly remembered. She's recently written a book, Lamlash Street, which tells the story of her family and growing up in London post-World War II. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Jill. It's lovely to have you join me for an episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. Nice to meet you.
You're an author, although you have been, other things in your life as well, which I covered in the intro. But I just wondered if we could start by talking about a little bit about your background and then how you came to write the book Lamlash Street.
Okay, so my background is not literary at all. It's not as if I come from a long line of authors or would-be authors. I was actually an occupational therapist for 30 odd years in healthcare in Canada. And then I became an organizational change manager. And while I was doing that, I also did my master's in occupational therapy because I wanted to upgrade my qualifications. But then after I had finished my career, I'm retired from that now, I decided I needed to do something else. I've always been somebody who wanted to find new things to do. And as the family was getting older, I noticed that with their, the aunts and uncles passed on, and my mother being the youngest and having 12 brothers and sisters, that, over the years, there was, the trickle of people that were no longer in my life occurred. I thought about the stories we used to talk about. You go to weddings and the odd funeral and christenings and do remember those days. So all this reminiscing family shared history was happening. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could somehow keep those stories going, because life back in the 1950s and 60s is so different from what it is now. But I also feel it's important to understand our roots, where we come from. It gives you a different perspective on current life. I think the other thing that was occurring at that time as well is that my daughter, who was mid-20s at the time, she was saying, "Oh, Mum, life is so difficult these days. You have no idea the stresses and strains we're under." And yes, that's true, but each generation has their challenges. And I think I wanted her to be aware as well that, yes, life can be very difficult at times, but it's been difficult in other generations' lifetimes as well. So, for example, my parents in their teenage years had the Second World War as a huge job for education, family life, people dying all around them, terrible, terrible things to face. And I thought about those and I thought, that does impact on you. It forms who you are. It So I thought, well, maybe it's a good idea to write some of these stories down. So, which is what I did. So I spoke to my mother, who was alive at the time, and said, um, and it was a nice bonding experience as well, because I could talk to mum about life back in the 1960s. Oh, do you remember when I used to go to school, mum, and I only had one route to school, or when I went to swimming from school, and I went to Manor Place Baths, which was oh yes, did you know Manor Place Baths is a Victorian building, and did you know why it was built and how it was built? So we had a really nice sort of narrative between the two of us, and so I just wrote some of these stories down. And then life intervened somehow, and one day I got this email through saying, "Do you need help writing a book?" And I thought, maybe that's what I'll do, because I always like to do things that people say, "Oh, you're going to do that, are you?" I like to sort of surprise people, and myself, really, to be honest, as well. And so I got back in touch with Book Launch, still with, and they helped me. They put me in touch with a book writing coach. Had no idea what this was, but that person listened to my stories and said, "Well, think about the structure," sort of guided me through it, basically. And so at the end of it, I became a published author. So it wasn't something I set out to do. But I'm very, very pleased that I've done this thing now. I'm sitting here with you today doing a podcast. That wasn't in my list of things to do either, by the way. Let's sit and talk about your life and your family. I've had people buy my book and make very nice compliments about it was so nice to hear your family story, and we have an appreciation of live back in the days, and really enjoyed it. And some people who knew those days and were reminiscing and saying, "Oh, I can remember when we had the tin bath on the back of the door because we didn't have a real bathroom," and all these stories of
Yes.
sort of thing. And people sit there like, "Oh, this is so nice to talk about these days." And it's a real point of connection. And I didn't see any of this happening. So answer to a short question, I didn't really plan to be a published author, but I am so glad that I have done this now. And it's opened doors I did not imagine at all. And from that, I went on to do other things as well in my life that I didn't think I could do. So I know one of the questions people ask me is like, "How do you do all these things?" It's like, well, when you do one and you're a success, or you know, in your own terms, you're a success. Um, and then you think, well, maybe I'll try that because this worked okay. Maybe I'll try this thing now. So I started running and all these things that I would have laughed at doing maybe even 10 years earlier. It's like, well, okay, so now what can I do? That's how I wrote the book. But it was a journey I really did not see the path to. I just sort of went from one thing to the other.
And, you know, the book is about the time back in the 60s and you growing up. And of course, I was at that time too. It is right that every generation thinks that they've got the hardship. And, you know, we all have our issues and our problems in every generation. But I am actually a great fan of the World War II history, and I love reading books about that time. And I also think it's important for us to ask our families, our extended families, to talk about things, because for myself, I lost my mum and dad, well, when I was in my late 20s. And so I haven't had them around for a long time. And there's many a time that I sort of think, oh, I wish I'd have asked them that question, or I wish I'd have asked them that. And I think as we get older, we want to have that connection with our past. But, you know, apart from that, I think that, you know, you're in the book, well, just a couple of little questions from the book. Your mother, you say that she was an unusually ambitious woman for her time. So how did that influence you? Because if I look at my mum, she was your typical stay-at-home mum, and you know, she didn't really go outside her boundaries very much at all. So for someone like your mum to have that ambition, that wasn't necessarily the norm back then.
Oh, no, it wasn't. Now, she had, I said, 12 brothers and sisters. And so she had 6 brothers. They were all like 6 foot tall, very imposing people. And the other thing you have to remember back in the 1960s is all the men had gone off to war in World War II, and they had come back as the saviors of the country, you know, almost war heroes almost. And so along with that was a sense of, well, you know, that's Uncle Sansana, he war, you did this. So in a sense, that gave them a sense of authority, for which really they didn't really earn it, but there was this aura around the men at the time, or they sacrificed their life or put their life on. So you weren't, in a sense, able to challenge or have a reasonable conversation with them by today's standards. And the other thing is, of course, back in the 1960s, you have to remember that women weren't really seen as having more than 2 brain cells in their heads, to be honest, that men would listen to. They were just these strange creatures that we needed but weren't quite sure about. So but my mother was not like that at all. Mum was very focused. Now, her father was a regimental sergeant major, a drill sergeant. So the family was very efficiently run in her life. And I think that spilled over, well, I know it spilled over into our life as well. So Mum was very goal focused, and she was determined that we were in southeast London, Elephant and Castle. She was determined that was not going to be our future. We were going to move on from there. We were going to have a much better life than she did. And she had seen a different side of life. So she was working with solicitors, lawyers, etc. As part of her job. And I think she'd seen that glimpse of life and decided that she wanted something very different. Also, my mother was fairly intelligent. I think she was probably more intelligent than most of the people within the family at the time. And so because of all those factors, she decided that education was very, very important. It's the most important thing you can give to a person when you're trying to change your way of living, when you're trying to move up financially. And she was very financially focused. She was very focused on myself and my brother. She was absolutely determined that we would always have new clothes, or not second-hand clothes, which is normal the days just to have second-hand clothes. But no, we used to go to Marks and Spencer's every 2 weeks. And we would go and get our clothes from there, which was a fairly expensive place to shop, you know, back in the day. So she made sure that our lifestyle was upward mobility, we'd call it now, and moving up. She'd make sure we were well educated. And then we actually moved out to Kent, which is on the outskirts of London now. At the time, it was considered to be fairly middle class, and it still is to a certain extent. So very genteel family life, sort of life of, you know, in the country. Very well-spoken people by London standards. And so that's what we did. I don't know how she did it or where the money came from. Dad was a London taxi driver. I think he worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week, from what I can remember. He was never around the house. He was always out earning a living for Mum to decide, you know, where the money would be spent. And she was determined, for example, homework was extremely important to her. You came from school, you had a snack, you went up to your bedroom for 2 hours, you did your homework, and only then could you go and do something else. And she was very, very strict on that. You know, there's a part of me that says, wow, I did nothing but work growing up, in a sense. But it led me to where I am now. So yeah, Mum was very, very different. Back in the day, most women would do the shopping, the cooking, look after the children, and make sure there was a meal on the table when the man came home. That was it, really. But Mum, she did all those things, but she did all these other things as well. So she was very different from anybody in the family.
Yes, so she would have been a role model to you. And I mean, you went on to study and to get a master's degree, and you moved to Canada, and you know, that's a long way from where you actually started. And so I wanted to ask you, we were talking before about you can do anything, and we've got a couple of things in common. I started running when I was 50, and you know, I've run a few marathons now, and I'm in my 60s and I still run, and I never thought I'd be able to do something like that. And I started the podcast. I didn't think I'd be able to do that, but I did. So as someone who, like yourself, who has had you've studied a lot and you've had a career. How did you feel when you retired? Were you prepared, or you stopped working? Were you prepared for the life that was going to develop, or did you feel a bit lost? Or because I know when I tried to retire at 57, after 6 months I just felt lost. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. So how difficult was it for you to go from your career into where you are now?
Initially, like you, it was very, very difficult. Because I was in a very high profile position at work. I was provincial sensitive as well for my profession for the licensing board for Canada. So I was jetting off every 3 months to one of the major cities in Canada for meetings, staying at lovely hotels and that. And they're all in a brand. And it was like, wow, now what do I do? And so I was really desperate, looking for something else to do. So I looked around. I moved to Alberta in Canada. I was in Newfoundland on these 3 years, enjoyed that, then moved back again. So I was searching. I think I probably spent 3 or 4 years searching, trying to find out where to go next and what to do. And then back in the UK, I was living in Canada. Back in the UK, my mum and dad were getting to the age where they were becoming quite frail. And so I thought, well, I'm retired. I should spend more time here in the UK, which is what I did for a while. And I think while I was backwards and forwards between the two countries, that's when I thought about the stories and the family. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write, at least I have all this time on my hands. Maybe I'll do this. And so that's when I wrote down the initial stories, and as you said, eventually had the book published. I don't know how. I mean, I hear some people do really well when they retire initially, but I know most people struggle. I think it's probably normal. And I think if you have a profession or a demanding position, then you tend to, if you're a career person, you tend to make that real focus for your whole life. So some people focus more on the more social side of life as they go through life, and some people focus more on the business side, which is more being in a profession. And I think once you've been in a profession and that ends, it's difficult to make that transition and to find out where do I go next. On the upside, because if you do have an education behind you, you do have the ability, especially now with the internet and so on, to look around and see what else you can do with your time, and how you can continue to contribute as well. That's the other thing I think I miss, is people were asking me for my advice all the time when I was working, and suddenly nobody was looking for my advice at all, which I found quite really. So yeah, it's all part of the learning experience, you know. Yeah.
Yes, well, I think, there's a lot of people that sort of plan what they're going to do in their retirement. But as you say, for those of us that have had a career and it's been a full-time career, that's where we've put most of our energies. It is difficult because you have that label, and then you need to re-identify who you are and actually go back to what you enjoy doing. A lot of people who have a career let their hobbies go, so they're not sure what their interests and hobbies are. So it does make it very difficult to transition into a less structured way of life. But, you wrote your book, and I suppose at the time you were really just thinking about getting the stories of your family down, perhaps for your own knowledge and family. And then, it got developed into a book which was published. So that must have been very satisfying for you to think that you'd gone and published a book, which not many of us have done.
So it's as the body experience, really. That's how it feels, because you can't believe what's going on. So then you Google yourself, and up pops your face and your biography and the book, and it's like, really, wow, is this really happening to me? So it's quite the experience. It changes your perception of yourself. So when you're talking to people, and and you say, oh, so what do you do? Oh, you wrote a book. Oh, really? You wrote a book? Oh, what's it all about? And where can I get it? It's like, really? You actually want to read this? But, you know, it's not that there's anything wrong with the book, but it's just my own perception of myself wasn't that I'd write stories down, I'd be a published author, and then people would buy my book. So you cannot help but change when you go through that process. You, as I said earlier, you move from, in your mind, from, well, you know, I mean, I've done my thing in life, to, like, oh, really? I'm a published author, and people ask me about it, and they identify me as an author. Because I was an occupational therapist for years, and that was a label I was quite happy with. But as an author, really, oh yes, and I do podcasts as well now. Oh, really? You do that as well? It's like, well, yes. And it's not. It's been a real surprise. The whole thing's been a total surprise. But one I love. I mean, I'm very happy with it, and I'm much more comfortable with it now as well. I can remember when I did my first live talk, talking about my book and what life was back in the day. It was a Brent library. It's over in North London, and the people who were there, I could tell by the looks on their eyes that they were so pleased to meet the author and to ask me questions. And it's like, wow, really, this is a new experience for me. I hadn't anticipated this. Very nice people. We had a lovely time together. It was really enjoyable. But yeah, it was a new experience for me. One I really wasn't even thinking was on the horizon. So I guess where I am now with it is like I'm wondering what the next horizon. It's changed my perception. So instead of thinking, oh, well, I know what's going to happen, and you know, this, that, and the other, it's like, I wonder what I can do next. I wonder what's around the corner. And I think that comes as well with you overcome certain things in your life as you go through life. And there's a quote I absolutely love, which is, do not get easier, you just get better. So things don't get easier in life as you go through life. You just get a lot better at dealing with them. And that's one of the things I really identify with as well.
Yes, yeah, the experience we have in life certainly does shape who we are. And I suppose having, you know, written the book, because I think there's something a little bit mystical and magical about authors. And that's why I think, you know, you could say, oh, well, I was an occupational therapist and I ran a hospital, I managed a hospital and all of that. And they'd go, oh, yes, that's really good. But I think when you say an author, people sort of suddenly think, wow, you know, you're an author. So I think there's something a little bit magical about that, and the way people feel, because I don't think it is easy to write a book. I think it's, you know, perhaps if we all tried, we could, but I think you have to have that determination and also a little bit of discipline there to actually get it out. I have a friend who's an author, and, you know, she has to discipline herself to write so many words a day and that sort of thing. But I think it also, with, you said, you know, you didn't really expect the reaction that you've had. I think it would do a lot for self-esteem as well, for self-confidence, that you've done this. So as you say, what else am I going to do now? I think you are more open to opportunities when you've achieved something, when you've achieved a goal that you didn't think perhaps you could do.
Yeah, I think it's, as you say, I wrote a thesis as part of my master's degree, right? I think nobody has ever asked me about it, not even what it was about. It's not the title. And certainly nobody, I think probably 3 people read it well. But whereas, as you say, you become a published author and you're a mini celebrity is what happens in other people's eyes. And I think their perception of you, their becomes part of the perception of yourself. So it's very freeing in a sense, because it means you go from I was a professional and I'm retired to, and as you know, if you're in healthcare, everything you do in healthcare is very confidential, so you don't share a lot of what you do because it's to do with client patient confidentiality. Whereas once you're an author, you can talk endlessly about your book and your life, and people are fascinated by it. So that was completely not what I expected. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
And I think also the topic of your book, you're writing about your family stories in the 60s. There would be a lot of people reading that would probably have similar stories, and you don't necessarily think about them, and then you read your book and go, oh yes, I remember that, or I remember this happened, or about that uncle or that person or whatever. And I think a lot of people can identify with the book because they've lived a similar sort of life back then.
That's right. Yeah, actually, one of the things that happens is a lot of it is reminiscing when I talk to people. It really is about the old days. I used to have a bath in front of the fire in a tin bath. Used to pour the water in, jug at a time. Used to bail the water out afterwards. So that's a favourite one. Another favourite one, which surprised, was Nitty Nora. I said, well, I don't suppose you know who Nitty Nora is. Oh, we used to have Nitty Nora. And I was talking to somebody in Canada, right? And so she was a lady who used to come around once every 2 weeks to check your head for head lice, right? Nitty Nora, we used to call it. He was always white lab coat. I don't know who the lady was, but the comb used to, oh, okay, you're fine, off you go. And the thing about head lice is if you had head lice, you couldn't go swimming, and I loved swimming. So it was always a bit of a stressful time for in case you caught head lice or somebody. And then but yeah, so it was... yes, it was different, right? It was it was, people love to identify with those stories, and the basic things. So, for example, Mum used to love Black Forest ham. I have no idea why, and it was this big thing. We used to spend half the morning walking up to the place called the Cut, near the old Vic Theatre. So it's that area of London, as we know it very well. And so we used to spend about half an hour walking up there. We would go to David Gregg's, which is now known as Gregg's, the store. And we used to have to go up to the lady and stand behind the counter, and you had to take it in turns. And I can still remember actually all these ladies there with these really heavy stockings and leather bags and hair nets who were lining up with us. And then Mum would say, I'd have 4 ounces of Black Forest ham, please. So they picked this ham hock, this piece of bacon, basically, off the shelf, and they put on the bacon slicer and hand it to you, and then you'd go down to the end of the store, and there was a lady there in a little booth, and you would pay that lady for the ham. But this took like 3 hours in the morning just to go get one piece of Black Forest ham. Now we just pop down to the convenience store, get some shrink-wrapped ham, and come back with it. So
that's right.
And laundry was the whole day. That's the other big thing people relate to.
Yes.
So now you just pop a pod, put in your clothes, pop a pod, press the button, and you can hear it whirring in the background while you're doing something else. Whereas in the old days, you used to pull out. Mum had an Hot Point Empress washing machine. She was so proud of this because everyone else had washboards and sinks, but no, we had a washing machine. So it was a bit like having a sports car in the family. So everyone was very proud of it, sort of thing, because we had this machine. And we had an electric mangle. So instead of having to turn the mangle, where they used to put the clothes in, so it squeezed the water out, these 2 rubber rollers used to rub against one another. And you'd handle, then you put the clothes in, and they came out really stiff the other end because it'd all been squashed. That took a whole day by the time you did, the laundry, and you took it up and you and went up. We had a 3-story house, and the top 2 floors. We had to go up 2 flights of stairs to the flat roof for where Mum used to dry the laundry. And the other thing about laundry, probably as well, is you try to stretch the number of times you wore the clothes. So now, you wash something once, throw it in the washing machine, and fine, it's done with. In those days, you would often wear clothes 2 or 3 days in a row. Or you would wear maybe a shirt underneath, and then maybe something over the top, like a cardigan or something. The cardigan you would wear the whole week, and the shirt maybe once, maybe 2 days, 1 or 2 days. And even underwear. I can remember being told, turn your underwear inside out so it could stretch a few more days so you could wear it.
Yes,
no. People are very careful about clothes.
Yeah, no, I mean, that would be unheard of in our Western world today, but and that's where I think, it's good for the younger generations to hear, because sometimes they're just they don't realize what conveniences they do have, because a lot of them have been brought up with, all these modern appliances, so they don't really understand what it would be like to live without that. They can't go without their mobile phones for, 10 minutes. So I don't know how they'd go not having washing machines and so forth. But so moving forward now, you've written the book. Do you have plans to write another one, or have you got any ideas of what you'd like to do? Are you doing you've said you've done some talks about the book. Are you doing those, or what's your life like now?
Okay, so my life, I'm now living in the UK for current times. I have no idea if I'm living here or going to move on. I have no idea yet, but it's fun living here right now. Because my poor mother passed away during COVID, with COVID as well, sadly. So I'm now living in her house, that was her house. So, which is why I'm still here, really, in the UK. And I have a lot of family here as well, so that makes a big difference. So in terms of writing, I do have I'm getting stories together, which is how I approached it last time. The first time you write a book, for me anyway, I had no idea how I was going to write a book. Should I be doing this? And there's AI out there now. Should I be using that? But no, I'm going to go back to how I did it the first time, which is I'm getting my stories together. So the stories are around what happened after Lamlash. So then I'll be in my early teenage years. But as with the first book, I would be looking back. So I wrote the book with the voice of a 10-year-old at the time. But I also wrote it from the perspective of being the author, being the age I am. So I could give some perspective to it as well. Looking back, this is how I see things, that sort of thing. So I'm going to keep that as well. Because as I touched on and as we discussed, the way I was brought up and the type of woman my mother was has formed who I am now. And because I've done so much more in my life than I probably may have done. And I think that the second book is going to reflect that more. But also, it's all going to have a flavour of this is where I am now. And this, because I was raised this way, I'm now in a time when I should be presumably slowing down and saying my life is over, sort of thing, picking up and doing more things and finding out more about myself. So it's going to be more of a mix, I think. The first one was more focused, probably 3/4 on back in the day with like 25% comments, but this I think is going to be more of a 50-50 mix between the two.
And I mean, isn't it wonderful to be in the position where you say, well, I don't really know what I'm going to be doing. I might stay here, or I might move on, or whatever. And there's not a lot of people that live their life like that. So that is probably, freeing as well, because it keeps that excitement alive, because you don't know what you're going to do. And a lot of people hold themselves back. They'd say, oh no, I couldn't live like that. I need to know that I've got everything in place and so forth. But it comes back again to being open-minded with what you're doing, and open to all experiences that come your way and opportunities.
Yeah, you're right. And I love the stimulation of new things happening all the time. And I think the other thing that's really enabled more of us to do this now is technology. So, for example, back in the day when I left Lamlash Street, I really didn't see any of my friends or family unless we travelled physically back to talk to them. Now I'm on the family WhatsApp for the UK, so I know what's going on with the birthdays, the christenings, anything else that happens. It's so much easier now to maintain contacts at long distances, be more mobile, but still have that connection from your family than it was back. So for me, that's made a huge difference, because I still need to contact my family. I still need to know what's happening in their lives. I need to know, if there's a special occasion coming up, okay, well, I'm there for that sort of thing. And also, I think I'm a bit of a globetrotter anyway. I learned that about myself because I was going back and forth between Canada and the UK so much over the years. And then when I was the provincial representative, I was traveling every 2 or 3 months across Canada and back again. And I was doing some recreational travel down to the US. I thought, I love this. I love going to airports. I love being on airplanes. I like going to new cultures. And the more you see, the more you want to see, because you become comfortable with learning how different cultures react to certain things, and you get used to travel. And one airport's the same as another airport, to be honest, no matter where in the world, those sorts of things. So you gain that confidence. So I
Yes.
think to a extent, I'm sort of a product of the times as well, really.
And of course, travel's back on everyone's agenda now because the COVID is no longer considered a threat. So I know from Australians' point of view, everyone's taking off, and we used to travel quite a bit, and then COVID came and we couldn't. So my husband and I are going to be making up for lost time too, because with Australia, we're on the other side of the world, and to go anywhere to Europe or to the States, it's a long flight, and you really can't just go for a week. You have to make sure you go for a longer period to get the most of it. So we're coming to the end of our chat now, and I just wondered if there was anything that you would like to add. I do have one more question which I will finish with, but before that, for example, if someone's read the book, or they are reading it, what do you hope that they will take from your experience?
I hope what they'll take from the book is to see, no matter how dark things may appear to be in your life, and we all have our struggles, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a way through it, but it does take persistence. You have to be fairly disciplined. But if you can really just manage to master those two things, you can do anything you like in life. The information is out there on the internet, free to everyone. You can, whatever you want to do in your life, you can do. You do the research, you do the groundwork, you focus on it, you do what you need to do. I mean, running, as you mentioned earlier, you're a runner. You know that you don't just start running. You have to do a lot of preparation for it. You have to condition your body. You have to eat the right foods. You can't go partying the night before, then do your marathon the next day. No, it doesn't work. So there's a certain things you have to do to get there. And in this day and age, there's so many people out there who are willing to share their knowledge. So whatever you want to do in life, and even if your family is saying you completely lost it, that doesn't matter. Whatever you want to do, you can do, and the help is out there, the support is there, but it does take persistence and it does take stubbornness. And you do have to ignore people who are saying, why are you doing this? What is wrong with you? So two things are ever the big thing as well. Never ever let age tell you that you can't do something. Age should never restrict you. Your physical condition of your body might, but age will never restrict you from doing anything.
No, and amen to that. I totally agree with that. So, as I said, we're coming to the end of our interview, and it's been lovely to meet you and to chat to you. But my question that I'm going to put to you is something that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what does being a woman living well after 50 mean to you?
For me, it means exploring your own possibilities. It means don't look back so much as, well, I was this for so many years and I've been a mother and so on. That's good stuff, and that's lovely. But think about what you really want to do with your life, and don't say to yourself, can't do it, can't do it, or too old, or that. Don't look at the reasons why you can't do it. Just recognize that you can do absolutely anything. And for me, since I've been over 50, it means the world's open for me now. As long as I keep myself healthy, then I can do absolutely anything I want to. And his name is Cyril. He is 100 years old, and he is so bright and alert. There were about 30 of us in his house the other day, wishing him happy birthday and toasting him and so on. And I said to him, what is the most important thing you could teach us? Because, even for me, he's like 30 plus years older than me. And he said the most important thing, he said, is to eat well. He still cooks for himself, like he has his steamed salmon and broccoli and so on. He exercises every day, And he says you have to do that so you can keep your mind clear. So if your mind is clear and you're you can control your life that way. So you have everything, because once your mind is clear, that controls your whole life. So I listened to that as well. I thought that is so true as well. So that would be for me. That's learned from other people as I get older.
Yes, yeah, that's great advice, isn't it? And we can always keep learning and being open to new things. So thank you so much for joining me, Jill. It was lovely to chat to you today and talk to you about your book and other things that you've done in your life and the way you approach life. And it's really been something of interest that I'm sure my listeners will enjoy. I'll be putting the links to where they can get the book, because I'm sure it would be good for them to read that as well. And it might encourage someone else to start writing their story. So that's, you know, an offshoot. We never know when we're going to be, you know, influencing other people. We don't even realize that we might be inspiring them. So your book and the way you just started writing your family stories might encourage someone else to do that as well. So thanks again for joining me, and you know, I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Well, that was great to talk to Jill today about her book, Lamlash Street, and her experiences growing up back in the 60s in London post-World War II. It might encourage you to start writing some stories that your family members can remember and to tell you, because I think it's quite precious to have your history even just written in a notebook, but you never know, you might become a published author as well. So if you've enjoyed the episode, I'd love you to leave me a comment or a like and share it with a friend. And that's it for this week. So until next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.